We are broadcasting on Spreaker. This is the English program, and we are moving on. This is an article that was published back in July of this year, July 24th to be precise. So almost a month ago. Alex Glennie is Principal Researcher in Inclusive Innovation in Nesta, and Robin Kalinga-Vidra is Lecturer in Political Economy at King's College London. And they're talking about diversity. They say the same old faces are deciding the world's future, and it affects us all. They've published a photo of Boris Johnson. They say just 160,000 Tory party members chose Britain's new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. It's the first time in history that the UK Prime Minister has been determined by voters from only one party. Research by Queen Mary University, London, and the Theresa May, Theresa May could have handed over the reins of power to Boris in the way Blair did to Brown, but the Tories preferred to have a party election. A typical Tory member is white, male, middle class, and over 50 years old. This has implications beyond the top level of political leadership. There is a widespread lack of diversity among the politicians and civil servants whose decisions affect the futures of all those in the UK. The traditions of Oxford University, for example, have significantly shaped the values and approaches of British politicians for better or worse. This is seen clearly in recent wranglings over Brexit. Many influential politicians, including the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Michael Gove, and Johnson himself, were members of the Oxford Union, where they cut their political teeth through student debate. How has that culture and tradition shaped the way the UK is ruled, and what is lost when those who determine government policy come from similar educational backgrounds? The writers say we suggest that it drives groupthink, which limits openness to new approaches and minimises attention on the broader needs of society. It is important to think about these questions. They help us to understand why and how policy leaders prioritise and make decisions. This isn't just a British challenge, it applies across the world. Research on emerging economies shows the finance ministers who have studied at universities that favour free market capitalism often implement policies that reflect those values. In particular, students at institutions with strongly neoliberal economics departments, such as the University of Chicago, may bring those approaches back to their home countries and apply them in government. Innovation agencies are government bodies responsible for supporting the development of new ideas, products and services. Their leaders may also be influenced by their educational background, according to a recent study. This reveals itself in the policy direction taken by different countries. In China, the focus is on developing homegrown technologies through the Made in China initiative. Chinese policymakers tend to have advanced degrees in subjects like technology and physics. In Singapore, leaders tend to have business degrees. Their innovation policy is more focused on creating favourable conditions for entrepreneurs. In Japan and Korea, social science degrees are more common. These backgrounds bring a different set of values to the field, leading them to prioritize social purpose. The research shows that East Asian innovation policy leaders tend to study in their home country for undergraduate degrees, but overseas for graduate studies. The US is a favoured destination. Could innovation policy in the region be shaped by American academic concerns, just as Chicago-trained economists tend towards free market economic solutions? The writers say, we believe that the national educational patterns of elite policy leaders have an influence on the way they make policy and the issues they focus on. Nesta recently conducted a survey of 24 European innovation agencies, and the findings highlighted that their staff tend to have studied social sciences. Fewer than a quarter hold MBAs, engineering degrees, or other qualifications. This shapes the assumptions and values they bring to innovation policy. So how can we expand the perspectives involved? One idea is for innovation agencies to actively recruit board members and staff that come from a wide range of educational, professional and social backgrounds. Some agencies already have programs to support innovators from diverse backgrounds. They should think about how they can apply this to their own workforce. Another option is to open up policy making so that priorities are not just set by a small group of similar people. Nesta has been experimenting with new ways to involve the public in decisions about innovation policy. For example, how more people could shape the decisions we make about driverless cars and low-carbon technologies. The lack of diversity in political leadership is worrying. A small proportion of Britain's population have selected the country's new Prime Minister from two candidates with similar educational backgrounds. Our research shows that around the world we need to look at the backgrounds of decision makers at all levels. From debates played out in the House of Commons to policies that shape the future of technology and innovation, we should aim for a more diverse mix of voices among our leaders. To be fair, though, the House of Commons has 650 members of Parliament from constituencies all over the country, and yet they've spent 3 years and failed to reach a decision on Brexit. I'm not sure diversity of opinion is the solution to the problem. It's a lack of caliber, whatever the word is, which is a totally different thing. The writers conclude by saying, particularly when it comes to innovation, the most future-facing of policy areas, new perspectives and a wider range of backgrounds could spur a more creative, vital approach to leadership and deliver better outcomes for everyone. Yes, well, the UK is definitely suffering from a lack of leadership. I'm just not sure that getting lots of people with different ideas is going to result in leadership. It will result in a hung parliament, which is almost what we have now. So if you get 650 people, all with different views, then it's just a recipe for chaos. So personally, not sure what your thoughts are on this. I prefer to just throw the cards and let them land where they land. What do you think? You're listening to the English program. I'm going for a cup of tea. This is the English program. We're broadcasting live on Spreaker using the Spreaker Studio app. It's 20 to 7 here in the UK on the 4th of the 9th, I should say, the 4th of September 2019. So let's have a look at this story now. Yvonne Black from the University of Hull says anxiety and depression, why doctors are prescribing gardening rather than drugs. The argument being made that gardening can make you happier and healthier. Let's take a look at this. Spending time in outdoors. Taking time out of the everyday to surround yourself with greenery and living things can be one of life's great joys, the writer says, and recent research also suggests it's good for your body and your brain. Scientists have found that spending 2 hours a week in nature is linked to better health and well-being. It's maybe not entirely surprising that some patients are increasingly being prescribed time in nature and community gardening projects as part of green prescriptions by the NHS. In Shetland, for example, islanders with depression and anxiety may be given nature prescriptions, with doctors there recommending walks and activities that allow people to connect with the outdoors. Social prescriptions, non-medical treatments which have health benefits, are already used across the NHS to tackle anxiety, loneliness and depression. They often involve the referral of patients to a community or voluntary organisation where they can carry out activities which help to meet their social and emotional needs. And increasingly, doctors are opting for community gardening. as this also has the added benefit of involving time spent in nature, even in highly built-up areas. And the evidence, the writer says, base for such treatments is growing, with research indicating that social prescribing can help to improve patients' anxiety levels and general health. Findings also seem to suggest that social prescribing schemes can lead to a reduction in the use of NHS services. In the next episode, the benefits of gardening. Just one moment though, I'm going to, if I can, play a little bit of music. So hopefully you can hear that, and the reason I'm playing the music is because I've got a little bit of a menu to give you still to come tonight here on the English program. How a poor diet can lead to blindness. Research from the University of Bristol. Most people know that a poor diet can lead to heart disease, diabetes and even cancer, but few are aware it can lead to blindness, says Denise Atan. More of that later. We also take a look at techno stress, how social media keeps us coming back for more, even when it makes us unhappy. Academics from Lancaster University and others say looking for a short-term fix from the very thing which is causing you long-term problems is a symptom of addiction. Finally tonight, how EU families in Britain are coping with Brexit uncertainty. Nando Segona from the University of Birmingham says applying for British citizenship or settled status is a way for EU nationals to take back control over their lives. We have the story on that a little bit later today here on the English program. This is the English program. We're broadcasting live on Spreaker. I was not ready then. We started quite suddenly then. We're looking at this issue of dog training for babies. Only if you want to raise kids who are anxious and unsympathetic, that is. The academic Amy Brown is Professor of Child Public Health at Swansea University. And the writer says, despite calls to cancel the programme, Channel 4 aired its new documentary, Train Your Baby Like a Dog, on August 20, that was yesterday. To give a brief synopsis of the show, an expert dog trainer, yes, a dog trainer, told parents to use dog training techniques with their young children to shape their behaviour. This included putting a child in a different room when they misbehaved and bribing them with treat foods to encourage good behaviour, including sitting obediently on the floor like a dog and being called a good boy or girl. It may sound ludicrous, but there could be serious consequences for parents repeating this advice. Babies and toddlers need loving support to help them understand and regulate their emotions and behaviour as they grow and learn. They can't help their challenging behaviour, such as waking at night or crying. Babies only have so many ways of communicating and processing what is going on around them. No one particularly relishes another sleepless night or trying to soothe an inconsolable baby. But how to best deal with this? Well, in contrast to this program's advice, evidence suggests that when parents are responsive to their child's needs, by recognizing when a child is tired and needs help sleeping or is overwhelmed and needs help calming down, their children go on to have fewer behavioral problems, higher IQ scores, and better social interactions with their peers. When the needs of babies and children are met in a gentle way, they feel secure and develop confidence and self-assurance. Meeting their needs with empathy appears to help them develop their own empathy and emotional intelligence. Dog training techniques teach children that parental praise or displeasure is contingent on how they act without helping them understand their behavior. When children are raised to understand, they'll be rejected. If their behavior doesn't meet sufficient standards, they're more likely to develop higher levels of anxiety and other emotional problems. It's not surprising. They worry they can be rejected or adored based on their behavior, but are never quite sure why. Using treats to shape behavior, meanwhile, sets children up to develop an unhealthy relationship with food, increasing their risk of obesity. Some may dismiss the advice in the show, but its strategies aren't dissimilar to some popular baby and toddler care books. These suggest only feeding at set times, allowing your baby to cry without giving comfort, and refusing to make eye contact if they wake at night. Not only does this fly in the face of research which supports responsive parenting, but the techniques they recommended discourage maternal behaviors that we know help keep babies safe and healthy. The writer says, in our research we found that the advice given in these books prompted mothers to delay responding to their baby's cries, which can increase levels of infant stress hormones. It also encouraged parents to put their baby to sleep in another room against safe sleep guidance, and even spurred them to reduce how much they cuddled their baby. Not only were these techniques harmful, but they only worked in getting infants to sleep around 15 to 20% of the time. When they didn't work, mothers felt even more anxious and frustrated than before, with some saying that they felt like a failure. Mothers who used the guidance had higher levels of stress and depression. Why do parents feel so stressed and isolated that they think treating their baby like a dog is a good idea? It says a lot about the pressures the families are under today. Surely a better solution to treating a baby like the family pet would be to teach parents the importance of responsive care and help them create the environment they need to do that. Instead, parents are told not to meet their child's normal emotional needs with love, but to treat them as an inconvenience they can be trained out of them. What do you think? You can follow us here on Spreaker. I think I'll give you our contact details just in case you're not aware. You can go to our website, English program. It's the British spelling, PROGRAMME. It's englishprogram.com. You are listening to a live broadcast. This is on Spreaker. Laura Hart is Senior Research Fellow at the University of Melbourne and has written an article, How Many People Have Eating Disorders? She says, we don't really know, and that's a worry. Last week, Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt announced that more than 60,000 Australians will be asked about their mental health and well-being as part of the Intergenerational Health and Mental Health Study. The Mental Health Survey will be run in 2020 with new data on how common mental illness is due the year after. This is a welcome announcement, the writer says, for the mental health sector because information gathered in a survey like this can be used to shape policy reform. Eating disorders, the writer says, a major category of mental illnesses, have been neglected by all previous important data collection initiatives in Australia so far. Notably, they were missing from the last national mental health surveys in 1997 and 2007. Eating disorders are not yet an official part of this new survey, but we understand, the writer says, they are being considered. If people with eating disorders are not counted, they don't count. In other words, we need to know who has these severe and debilitating conditions and then work towards improving the treatment and support available for them. National surveys ask the public if they have experienced symptoms of various mental illnesses, either in their lifetime or during the past 12 months. People who answer yes to particular clusters of symptoms are diagnosed or assumed to have had the illness. Asking the public about their symptoms is the best way to understand how common mental illnesses are. This is because most people with a mental illness don't seek treatment and may never have had a diagnosis. So collecting data from health services or based on reported diagnoses doesn't provide a full picture. The writer says for some mental illnesses such as anorexia nervosa or psychosis, people might not realize they have a diagnosable illness, but they are likely to respond yes to direct questions about their experiences with body dissatisfaction or thinking difficulties. A person with anorexia nervosa engages in dangerous behaviors to maintain a very low body weight or to lose more weight. Although most people have heard of it, anorexia is not common. We know this from other countries who have previously studied the prevalence of anorexia in community surveys. That being said, it's very serious and can be fatal. It has the highest mortality of all non-substance use mental disorders, and 1 in 5 of those deaths is by suicide. Other eating disorders include bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, and other specified feeding and eating disorders, a catch-all group for those who don't fit anywhere else. People with bulimia nervosa or binge eating disorder experience cycles of binge eating, often after periods of restricting foods, which cause shame, guilt, and discomfort. Those with bulimia compensate for binge eating through vomiting, fasting, exercise, or other methods, while those with binge eating disorder do not. Binge eating disorder is the most common of all eating disorders and occurs more equally across men and women than other eating disorders. As well as continued weight gain, people with binge eating disorder are more likely to experience depression and anxiety and other significant health problems such as asthma, diabetes, and arthritis than people with a high BMI, body mass index, but no binge eating disorder. One example of OSFED is atypical anorexia nervosa, when someone shows all the symptoms of anorexia and has lost a significant amount of weight but their BMI is in the normal or high range. Eating disorders disproportionately affect females, young people, LGBTIQ individuals, and those with a high BMI. People with eating disorders often have a negative body image and a strong perception their self-worth is tied to their appearance or body weight. Every year in Australia, millions of years of healthy life are lost because of injury, illness, or premature deaths in the population. This is known as burden of disease. Like national surveys, burden of disease studies are extremely important for planning and funding health services. They use prevalence statistics, or how many people per 100,000 of Australians are assumed to have a particular illness. Given we don't have good data on how prevalent eating disorders are, we likely underestimate their burden of disease. The recently released Australian Burden of Disease Study 2015 lists eating disorders among the most burdensome illnesses for Australian females, being the 10th leading cause of total burden of disease for females aged 5 to 14 and women aged 25 to 44. Importantly, the most common eating disorder, binge eating disorder, is not included in burden of disease studies, meaning all these figures miscalculate the impact of eating disorders by a long way. The writer says, despite our lack of prevalence data, there is evidence showing eating disorders are an increasing problem and should be regarded as a national priority. Consecutive population surveys in South Australia showed the numbers of people with eating disorders climbed over a 10-year period. Annual youth surveys demonstrate body image, the most potent risk factor for eating disorders, is year after year among the top concerns for young people. A recent study on adolescents in the Hunter Valley region of NSW found 1 in 5 had experienced an eating disorder. People with eating disorders use more health services than people with all other forms of mental illness, but often don't receive appropriate and effective treatment. They typically receive treatment for weight loss, depression or anxiety, but are rarely treated for their disordered eating. Eating disorders were estimated to cost the health system 99.9 million Australian dollars in the year 2012 alone. Better treatment and prevention of eating disorders would reduce the cost and the burden of disease. We need the data to show where the treatment gaps are and how to fund better services, the writer says. There are many promising elements of the proposed intergenerational health and mental health study. These include surveying multiple people in a family, gathering physical and mental health data, and a target of more than 60,000 Australians. But it's time eating disorders were included. This is the English program. This is the English program. Juliet Ollard is a researcher at Nesta, and today, August 22, she published this article on STEM. Efforts to inspire more children could be entrenching educational inequalities. She says science, tech, engineering and maths, STEM, education is a priority for governments around the world. For example, the UK's current commitment to increasing investment in research and development to 2.4% of GDP by 2027 means that we need to train 260,000 more researchers to carry out the work. There has long been a perceived shortage in such skills and knowledge, and this drives policy measures in education, skills and immigration to address the situation. In their STEM strategies, governments are increasingly focused on addressing the large disparities in participation between different social groups. For example, in the UK, only 15% of scientists come from working-class households, just 7% of patents are filed by women, and among startup founders, men outnumber women 4-1. The problem is often discussed in terms of a leaky pipeline. The idea that potential STEM professionals are lost at particular points along defined pathways. This spurs governments around the world to target activities at young people, aiming to foster STEM engagement from an early age. STEM inspiration is one way to do this by offering STEM-related activities to school-age children beyond usual subject teaching. This could take place within schools or informally through visits to museums or in the home or community. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the BEIS, funds STEM inspiration in the UK, spending £103 million annually on programmes delivered through bodies such as STEM Learning Limited, the Wellcome Trust and the British Science Association. But is all this activity having the desired effect, or could it even be doing more harm than good? First, we know that there is just not enough provision. For example, the writer says, our mapping of invention programs found that they reach just 1.5% of the UK school population annually. Overall, participation in STEM careers activities is low, with less than 30% of 11 to 14-year-olds reporting having taken part in 2017. In light of evidence that it takes around 4 role model encounters for effects to be seen on students' aspirations, it is likely a very small and select group that receives effective provision. Also, provision continues to exclude students and communities who need it most, those who are traditionally less likely to take part in STEM. UCL's Aspires team has found that while significant proportions of the school population report never having had access to STEM and inspiration, this is particularly the case among disadvantaged groups. The writer says, our own research looked in more detail at one particular type of STEM inspiration activity, competitions. STEM competitions are an increasingly popular model in the UK and internationally, challenging students individually or in teams to apply STEM skills and knowledge to hands-on projects. There are around 50 STEM and innovation competitions in the UK. Government departments run their own. For example, the Youth Industrial Strategy Competition by the BEIS and Cyber First by the National Cyber Security Centre. The model is also very popular in the US and China and reflects a strategic focus on STEM for economic growth. However, in some countries, such as Finland, competitions are treated more as opportunities to collaborate and share knowledge than promote individual success. And in Singapore, there is a noticeable emphasis on creativity in STEM. The writer says, "We looked at participation in STEM competitions in England and compiled a data set of 179 schools that had teams shortlisted from 13 competitions in total. While 2 competitions, the Leaders Award and IET Faraday, provided complete lists of all participating schools, only shortlisted schools were available for other programs." Classifying schools by type, the writer says, "We found that 21% were independent schools, a large overrepresentation. Independent schools make up just 10% of all schools in England. This is probably because while over 80% of independent schools offer STEM competitions as an extracurricular activity, only half of all state schools do." After excluding independent schools, the writer says, "We added data on state schools' deprivation levels using eligibility for the pupil premium, extra funding allocated to schools to support students from disadvantaged backgrounds, as an indicator. We found that almost half, 45%, were in the least deprived, fifth of all state schools. In other words, there is a strong skew towards schools serving richer populations. Other studies show that this pattern holds in different fields too. For example, independent schools are also overrepresented in enterprise competitions, and theoretical work suggests that such competitions reproduce inequalities between participants, schools, and communities. Academics question the educational value of competitions, observing that such exercises emphasize the extrinsic reward of achievement, so that participants engage in tasks to win rather than to learn. However, competitions can be designed with a commitment to equity, meaningful learning, and long-term outcomes for communities, by organizations that draw on research, evidence, and lessons learned through their own practice. For example, the Leaders Award, run by Primary Engineer, asks children, "If you were an engineer, what would you do?" Challenges them to apply engineering principles to a problem of their choice. The program runs 16 distinct regional competitions, reaches 60,000 students annually, and emphasizes local community and industry links. As ever, Finland provides an inspiring example. STAR-T is an international program run by the Lume Center, a network of Finnish universities dedicated to ensuring high-quality science, technology, and mathematics teaching. Students develop projects based on their own interests, with the requirement that projects are related to science, maths, and/or technology. Interdisciplinary projects and those which incorporate other subjects such as art are encouraged, and that they address one of the STAR-T themes. These projects can then be shared at events where children peer assess each other's work. A key feature of the program is the learning community. Schools, kindergartens, extracurricular clubs, and even families register as learning communities to support projects and are invited to share best practices within this network. The writer says, "From our review of STEM competitions and the research behind them, we've identified 4 principles of good practice. First, equity. Competitions should be designed with those who are the most excluded in mind, so that provision is practically and conceptually inclusive. Second, congruence. The offer should relate to students' own experiences and facilitate the move to further study. Third, intensity. One-off experiences are rarely effective. Sustained and joined-up support is needed for long-term outcomes. Finally, reflection. For both participants and providers, it's important to build in opportunities for reflecting on and integrating learning into further study or further iterations of programs. The writer concludes by saying, if these 4 foundations are put in place, STEM inspiration can better serve students, and through them, society in general. We're looking at fake news now on the English program. Voters may form false memories after seeing fabricated news stories, especially if those stories align with their political beliefs. This is according to research in Psychological Science, a journal of the Association for Psychological Science. The research was conducted in the week preceding the 2018 referendum on legalizing abortion in Ireland, but the researchers suggest that fake news is likely to have similar effects in other political contexts, including the US presidential race in 2020. In highly emotional, partisan political contests, such as the 2020 US presidential election, voters may remember entirely fabricated news stories, say the researchers. In particular, they are likely to remember scandals that reflect poorly on the opposing candidate. The researchers, including leading memory researcher Elizabeth Loftus of the University of California, recruited 3,140 eligible voters online, asking them whether and how they plan to vote in the referendum. The experimenters presented each participant with 6 news reports, 2 of which were made-up stories that depicted campaigners on either side of the issue engaging in illegal or inflammatory behavior. After reading each story, participants were asked if they had heard about the event depicted in the story previously. If so, they reported whether they had specific memories about it. The researchers then informed the eligible voters that some of the stories they read had been fabricated and invited the participants to identify any of the reports they believed to be fake. Finally, the participants completed a cognitive test. Nearly half of the respondents reported a memory for at least one of the made-up events. Many of them recalled rich details about a fabricated news story. The individuals in favor of legalizing abortion were more likely to remember a falsehood about the referendum opponents. Those against legalization were more likely to remember a falsehood about the proponents. Many participants failed to reconsider their memory even after learning that some of the information could be fictitious. And several participants recounted details that the false news reports did not include. The researchers say this demonstrates the ease with which we can plant these entirely fabricated memories, despite this voter suspicion and even despite an explicit warning that they may have been shown fake news. Participants who scored lower on the cognitive test were no more prone to forming false memories than were higher scorers. But low scorers were more likely to remember false stories that aligned with